Hi, folks. This is a learning path for buying digital services brought to you by the Public Spend Forum. I'm Frank McNally, and I'm joined with my good friend and technical subject matter expert, Neil Chaudhry.
Hi.
Hi, Neil. Good to have you this morning. So what we're trying to do in this particular series of content is walk you through the Digital Services Playbook with an eye towards buying digital services. So basically, in this stream, we're going to talk about what is the Digital Services Playbook, right? Neil, do you want to say off the top of your head what the Digital Services Playbook is and what it really means to you?
Yeah, so the Digital Services Playbook is basically a series of plays that are the foundation for any good digital service procurement and execution. And basically, they form a set of guidelines and principles that we should all follow so that we can make sure that we're delivering value to the American taxpayer.
Nice. And sorry for any auto tune out there. This is not an in-sync track, but we are recording on Skype today. So why does it matter for federal procurement, right? So you just talked about it being plays for healthy and useful digital services development. Well, it matters for federal procurement because buying digital services is really a lot different than anything we've ever bought. It's not like buying commodities off schedule. It's not like, major weapons systems or even, basic professional services, right? Because it's software development, it's effort in support of functionality. And then what do we mean by plays, Neil? Why is it a playbook? What is that notion?
Well, the idea is that you need to have a certain set of codified practices that you should try to follow because they are proven in the commercial world and in some parts of the public sector as well to deliver great software at reasonable cost. Mm-hmm. And so it's important that while we understand these vague ideas, these principles as to how to do that, it's nice to have some more tangible characterizations for the kinds of things we should do.
Right on. So would it be fair to say that the plays are actionable, implementable, and simple?
The plays as specified in the playbook are pretty good guidelines, and they're simple. Of course, it takes a little bit more in-depth analysis to figure out how you actually apply them day to day. But certainly they provide a nice set of guideposts to make sure that if you're doing those things, then you're probably doing something right.
Okay. Yeah, right on. So we're talking about best practices from the public and the private sector. I think that's an important note. I mean, this is not just private sector Silicon Valley development. These have been sourced from the public sector as well, because there have been examples of digital procurement success in government, some very good examples. And there's always stuff that we can learn from the private sector. And, you and I have talked about this a lot, Neil, that these plays, like you mentioned, they are simple. I mean, they almost read like platitudes, but they're not, right? I mean, there's actual value in these if you follow them correctly.
Absolutely.
And I think another really important part is that it emphasizes constant communication and collaboration with customers. I mean, is there anything more important than communication and collaboration with customers in digital services?
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
The thing is that it's important to come up with ways to make sure that this communication is actually resulting in tangible results. Because I'm pretty sure that everyone ever involved in a software project was certain that they were delivering what the users wanted. Mm-hmm. It's just that it wasn't always the case because they never took the time to verify their assumptions with users. And so the intentions were good, and a lot of these plays are intuitive, but it's important to actually do the work necessary to validate your learning and to make sure that what you believe is true really is true.
Yeah, that's a great way to state it. That's really good. And we're going to talk about that too, and when we get into play one and beyond. But, just understanding who the user is, who the customer is, who all the players are. So, yeah. So it's also supported by the tech FAR. And if you're not familiar with the tech FAR, you definitely will be by the time we're done with this stream, because we're going to show how the tech FAR helps us incorporate and implement the plays from the Digital Services Playbook. And I say it's about helping the acquisition professional find those permissible exercises of authority. if you're familiar with the federal acquisition regulations, specifically the guiding principles, you know that the FAR basically tells us that if something is not prohibited and it is justified and it is in support of the goals of federal acquisition and the public policy objectives, then it's a permissible exercise of authority. We can do it. And I think the Tech FAR is a really important document to help put into practice, from an acquisition perspective, how we actually execute the plays in support of buying digital services. So without further ado, let's talk about each of the plays at a high level, but more for the purpose of just showing how they can map to the acquisition lifecycle. I mean, and I think it's important to answer one quick question, like why would we attempt to map this to the acquisition lifecycle? And the answer that I have, at least, is because enabling digital services is sort of a process, unto itself. I mean, it is a process to understand the need, to work through the product road mapping or whatever design principles you're using, and ultimately come to a solution. And it's really important that the acquisition process kind of follow that to some extent, right? And really understand it at a detailed level, because at the end of the day, if you're going to acquire anything, you must understand what you are buying, right? And I know that by the way, when we do this, this is not going to be gospel. Like, there are going to be places where we've mapped a play to, or a phase that it might not be, in your opinion, out there exactly right. And I want to invite feedback. Like, I want to know what you guys think specifically. Like, if there's something that you disagree with, tell us, because we want to evolve this thing with the community. We're not suggesting that we have all the answers, far from it. We're just trying to facilitate this conversation and help people work together and collaborate. So Neil, let's just take it play by play. Play one is understand what people need. I think this is relatively intuitive. You sort of just spoke to it already. The acquisition nuance for me is exactly who are the people. Like, there's a customer, there's a user, there's a program owner. Who are the people, and what do they need? I mean, do you have those same questions when you're starting a digital services project, Neil?
Oh, absolutely. You have to know the various concerns and needs of whoever's going to use it, for one thing. Mm-hmm. It's important to make sure that you understand exactly what they're hoping to get out of it. What is the problem that they're trying to solve? Yeah. What are the barriers in place that keep them from solving it? Right. And as I said before, a lot of people who are involved in digital service delivery, they believe they know the answers to those questions, and maybe they do, but maybe they don't. Mm-hmm. And it's important to perform these experiments and to actually work with real users to figure out if your hypotheses, if your theories are actually valid.
Definitely. And I think that's got to happen in the planning phase of the acquisition lifecycle. You need to do that right away. And it really tees up the next play, which is to address the whole experience. I have this spanning the entire acquisition lifecycle. I mean, you should be thinking about the whole experience, not just of the digital service you're delivering, but for me, from an acquisition perspective, this is about how will the contracting choices that you make today impact delivery and impact the viability of the contract and impact how you're going to have to manage that contract after you award. What resonates with you here, Neil, in terms of just digital services delivery? Because I just gave sort of the acquisition perspective.
Well, in terms of addressing the whole experience, you want to make sure that your user experience people are certainly involved from the beginning. They're experts in sort of cognitive science, psychology, sociology, and technology to make it all work together to ensure that a user really gets what they need out of the digital service experience. It's very important because there's a lot of sophisticated technology out there that simply is unusable. Mm. And all that effort and resource that went into building these complex, wonderful things end up collecting dust because no one can actually access them or use them in any kind of intuitive way. So you want those user experience people to be involved from the beginning to make sure that users will truly get what they need out of it.
Right on. Well said. Yeah, I mean, user design, I'm glad you mentioned that there's like academic discipline behind this. That's extremely important. I mean, I remember, this is maybe not a perfect example, but like like a really complicated video game that was just like graphically looked awesome and had a great storyline, but the controls were just too difficult, like nobody could really manipulate it, that was probably a user design failure.
Probably so, or you're just bad at video games.
Well, I
But
am
one or the
actually
other.
historically terrible at video games, so I'm
Yeah.
probably not. But I mean, I know people that are good at like Striker for Nintendo or like Sega when that first came out. Apparently, that was like a hyped up game, and like, nobody could play it because it just was not intuitive.
Yeah, that's
That
true.
the way back just went back to Striker and Sega. So hey, good to be a millennial. Make it simple and intuitive. Duh. That's. I mean, I think everybody wants to make it simple and intuitive. I mean, I hope. Let me qualify that. I hope people want to make things simple and intuitive. A great example of this in the acquisition setting is what AT&F did with their Agile Delivery Services BPA, specifically creating Google Forms to collect and automate that information collection. Like that is just one way to simplify things. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do in contracting. To whatever degree you can make it simple, make it intuitive, you should, because that's just going to give your vendors and the people that are seeking to satisfy a requirement, it's going to give them more time to spend on creating value, right? Not consuming resources. Might be a different perspective in digital services, Neil.
In terms of delivering software and delivering digital services, there is nothing that is more harmful than complexity. And I'm not the only one who's written about this. Pretty much at any decision point in the delivery process, you need to take the simpler route, always. Because any kind of complexity will make it very hard to deliver fast time to market and to deliver changes to software, which are always happening quickly, because you have to weave through all the complexity in your software stack. And so it's very important at every decision point to keep things simple. It makes it easy to secure, easy to use, easy to maintain, easy to deliver.
Now that's a fantastic point. Now I want to put a peg down on what you said about the changes process, because we're going to see that in especially play 5. It's important, and I'll go out of order just a second because I think it's worth picking up on that point. The more that you have to execute change control procedures in managing a digital services contract, the more resources and budget you take away from the delivery team to achieve validated learning. And that's a problem. And I understand that change control, modifications, things like that, they have to happen. They're a part of contracting. Nobody's going to write a perfect contract. But when you are structuring your contract or structuring your budget, you should think about the delivery. Think about the whole experience and think, if we have to change something slightly, if we have to respond to an issue we found with legacy systems, or we find a fly in the ointment that we didn't expect and we have to deal with it, I want to make it so that the contract enables us to address that and doesn't require us to go through unnecessary review or choke things up by a complicated review cycle. So play 5. When we get to this, we're going to really get into the technical nitty-gritty of contracting, because it's critical that we address that. And we got to address that from solicitation through administration, contract management.
Yeah, and no one would disagree that make it simple and intuitive is something to avoid. I think everyone who's ever tried to do this thought they were doing things in a simple and intuitive way. The question is, how do you validate that? How do you prove that that's what you're doing? What kind of practices do you follow to make sure that's the case? And I think that's an important point to make. That with a lot of these plays, they sound obvious and very intuitive, but you need specific ways to go about accomplishing them. And we saw that with play 1. I think we see that also with play 3, that you need ways to actually guarantee that you are doing what you think you are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's why I made play 3 sort of from solicitation through administration, because when you're setting up that solicitation, you're going to want to have the right quality assurance. You're going to want to see what the contractor is going to do to ensure that they're continuing to make things simple and intuitive, and that would be part of your evaluation strategy. And then when you're doing contract management, again, you want that simplicity. And so that's where structuring budgets and contracts with an eye for supporting delivery will help you achieve that. Neil, how does it make you feel when people say they want to buy Agile? When I want to go out and buy Agile, does that bug you at all?
I just want to know where on eBay you can find it.
Is there a buy it now button
Yeah.
for Agile?
I wonder if that's available on Amazon Prime. If I can get free shipping on that Agile,
It
that'd be
will be
great.
soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, 2-day shipping, that'd be awesome. No, I mean, it's just sort of an absurd notion to me. I teach a course on Agile and iterative practices, so do a lot of other people. There's a whole discipline related to being Agile. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of cognitive dissonance on what being Agile really means. And there are true sets of principles and practices that can be followed and that are tangible, they're not theoretical, that have been followed to success in the commercial world and in the public sector as well. And understanding what these principles are and also eliminating the hype and the misconceptions, that's a very, very important thing for an acquisition professional as well as for someone who's actually delivering digital services.
Yep. Well said, man. Yeah, I play for, we want to use the practices. We're not going to buy. I mean, you could buy the services of an Agile shop, right? But you're not buying Agile. It's nothing to be acquired. I mean, it's just not, we just need to get away from thinking about it as an outcome itself. It is a process that enables outcomes. I don't think I.
And how would you even know the shop is Agile to begin with, just because they told you they are?
Oh, that's true. If they have it, maybe if they have it in their name, does that count?
The bottom line
Tongue in
is,
cheek, of course.
do they deliver working software on a rapid and frequent and regular basis, literally every 2 weeks or so? And so as soon as you have that, then at least you know you're on the road to being Agile.
Definitely.
And when I say working software, I mean production quality.
Right.
Like it could be deployed as it is right now.
So play 4, we could really just assess based on, do we get working software often? I mean, we don't even have to say, is this an Agile process? I mean, like, that's honestly, like, you talk about performance-based acquisition, just say, I want this, and I want to make sure it's delivered in, increments. And then if they use an Agile process or if they use whatever they're using, I don't care at the end of the day. I mean, we want to build it. Like, this is where we do have some distinction between the plays and the acquisition process, right?
That's exactly right. So with Agile, I mean, I would love for everyone to understand terms like Agile and DevOps, continuous delivery, and things like that. But to me, that's less important than making sure that you ask for things in such a way that the only way to deliver them would be to use Agile and DevOps. So for example, you could say, okay, I want to see working software delivered literally every day. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to test it necessarily, but I just want to be able to log in and click around and play. Mm-hmm. Well, that's all you have to really say. But it turns out the only way you're really going to be able to do that is if you've mastered things like continuous integration and DevOps and continuous delivery. It just so happens you don't have to state it that way, but there's no real other way to do it to accomplish that simple goal of having something deployed at all times.
That's great. Just continuous delivery and deployment. Absolutely. Well, let's get on to play 6. Assign one leader and hold that person accountable. If you don't have accountability in teams or in projects, you're not going to get commitment from people, and you're also not going to be able to incentivize. I mean, accountability, fundamental. We have to have it. One person has to be sort of, in this situation, what we call it, in acquisition circles, and I think in broadly, is the program owner or the product owner, the person who's going to say at the end of the day, these user stories are going to be part of the roadmap, or we are going to make this choice about scope, or we are going to make other decisions that affect the ultimate product.
You mentioned earlier this is kind of a malleable chart, and I would certainly extend number 6 here to the entire lifecycle through administration, because the product owner is a very, very important person in the sense that they are empowered to represent the interests of the stakeholders, which is not an easy job, but they also have to communicate those interests to the digital service delivery team and make sure that the team understands exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then finally, the product owner also has to decide whether things have been delivered? What are the acceptance criteria to
Mm-hmm.
determine if the thing delivered by the digital services team is actually correct and right and actually does meet the interests of the stakeholders? And so that's a very, very important role that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be exercised throughout the process.
I will not disagree with you there at all. I mean, once that leader, the program owner, or the product owner is identified, he or she is going to be a part of this through the end of the useful life of the software. Uh, just as, and I'm happy to listen to feedback and make changes. Absolutely. My thought process in putting it in planning and solicitation was to trigger for the acquisition professional to understand that you do not go into an award without having this one person identified and account. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't move out of the planning stage, right? Without, because you're making decisions about acquisition strategy, doing market research in the planning phase. It's going to inform your solicitation. In my opinion, you should have that done first and foremost. But then, Neil, I'll grant you, you're absolutely right. It's got to extend throughout. So it will probably mess up my origami here a little bit, but it's fun to play around with these things. It's like a nice puzzle. So 7 and
Well,
8.
I mean, this is what Tetris is for, to help you figure out how to arrange these things the right way.
Well, I already told you I wasn't good at video games, but maybe Tetris doesn't count. I don't know. Play 7 and 8. Bring in experienced teams and choose a modern technology stack. These feel like they go together to me. I don't know if you agree.
Certainly, an experienced team will know what a modern technology stack is. And so I don't know, and certainly you can speak to this better than I can, how much voice an acquisition professional should have in deciding a modern technology stack. But then again, however, it's important to at least be aware of what the modern technologies
Yeah.
are and have a very basic idea of where they apply. For example, someone might try to sell you a solution about Hadoop, and Hadoop is a modern thing and it sounds great and everyone talks about it in all the publications. But it's at least good to know that Hadoop is really only necessary when your data are humongous.
Mm.
And your data probably aren't humongous yet. And so you probably can get away with a much simpler solution to solve the problem you have. So there are other modern technologies that can solve that problem using Python or R or other things to solve a smaller scale data analytics problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least knowing that much is enough so that when someone comes to you and says, oh, hey, we got this really big, expensive, complicated Hadoop solution, which might be perfectly applicable for a different agency, they might not be applicable for yours. And so bringing in those teams and also having enough knowledge to figure out what probably applies to your situation, I think is useful. But of course, those teams will have the most expertise.
Right. I think that's, I would agree that it's probably not the acquisition professional's role to choose the modern technology stack until they're making the evaluation and award decision. I think I put it here because I'm thinking about it as an evaluation criteria. Like, we talk about performance-based acquisition and using agile and iterative practices. I'd prefer not to dictate to the vendors or the offerers what stack to use. Like, I would like to trust that they, if they know their stuff, would know not to, bring Hadoop to a small data party, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
you mentioned earlier the Agile BPA.
Yeah.
And one of the cool concepts there was deploying your software to a platform, but also putting your software up on GitHub or your source code up on GitHub. Mm-hmm. And so if you look on GitHub, you can simply see that, they're using Angular, they're using Java, they're using these technologies that you happen to know are modern. That's, at least it triggers to you some sense of comfort that that these people know exactly what a modern technology stack entails. Now, if you see that, hey, they delivered something to GitHub that's in COBOL, well, that should set off an alarm bell in your head that that even though they did deliver something, it probably isn't the kind of delivery you want.
Right. And I went ahead and rolled out Play 9 because you started to talk about deployment and GitHub and other Git-like repositories. And so, that deployment in a flexible hosting environment, can you talk to that just a little bit, and I'll see if I can add a little color on how it works in the acquisition process.
Right. So it's important to be able to show your working software, as we discussed with Play 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so one way to do that is to deploy your working prototype or working software to an actual cloud provider, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are probably familiar with platform as a service providers like GoDaddy from Super Bowl ads,
Mm-hmm.
where people can deploy their WordPress blog about cats really quick with one click. And that's the kind of thing we can do in other areas as well that aren't WordPress.
Mm.
So there are cloud providers out there where you can simply, quite easily, deploy your software out there, and then it can be scaled higher or lower based on your needs, because that's what the cloud's for. And so when it comes to delivering your production software, that's what you want to do. You want to deploy it in a place that where everyone can see it, and you can scale it and modify it as needed. There's also the notion of publishing your source code out there, which is what the Agile BPA promoted, to GitHub and places like that, which isn't so much production quality software hosting, but source code hosting. So you can actually see, and this also gets to Play 13 default to open,
Mm-hmm.
where you can actually see what the actual source code is and what the actual files are and the configurations are for delivering this digital service.
Hey, right on. Right on. And when we saw, and I put it, by the way, in the as initiating or starting in the solicitation phase and going through administration, primarily because in that solicitation, it would be great to mimic what 18F and GSA did in that Agile Services BPA, which was say, hey, show us, don't just tell us, like create a prototype. You know, if you'll recall from that, it was a prototype based on open FDA data sets. And they said, look, you got to deploy, we're going to have to deploy in a flexible hosting environment, but in this case, we want to go ahead and see how you would do that. And so they made everybody use a Git repository to show their working software. So I think that's why, you know, I had it starting there. And then, okay, so that's sort of the deployment and flexible hosting environments. Is a really nice description, by the way. Thank you. And I remember those GoDaddy Super Bowl ads as being kind of weird. But then Play 10 is about automating testing and deployment. This is a little outside my area of expertise. I mean, I think I understand it principally, but can you kind of talk to that for a minute?
So this, I think, is part and parcel with Play 4 of agile and iterative practices, where we want to automate the processes of software engineering. And that means automating your builds, so that, because you have teams of people working, and we want to make sure that at any moment I can take everything everyone's working on and build it, and there's no incompatibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an automated build. You want your test to run on a regular basis, probably every time someone checks into version control, that kind of thing. And so that kind of automated testing is typically known as continuous integration, meaning that at various intervals or at various events, like checking into source control, that everything starts running, that the builds are happening, tests are happening, documentation is being generated, all those kinds of automated tasks are just happening in a completely simple and automated way. That's once it's set up, it just runs. It's set it and forget it, like the old Ronco food dehydrator. Okay, but then with automated deployment, that gets to what DevOps is. So the process of, okay, it works on my machine, it works on the dev machine, how do I move it now to the production machine? We've all seen that can be a problem, that there's configuration problems and other things that can happen when you do that. And so we can automate that process as well via a DevOps mindset. And there are tools out there like Docker that help to automate the process of, once you get it working on your machine, how do I package it up so it can be delivered to a separate machine in production? Mm-hmm. I've seen this happen with working in the defense space, where it works on your dev machine, but now you want this to be able to be rolled out to theater in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you make sure that everything, all the dependencies, everything that's set up that needs for the thing to work, that all happens in production as well? And so you can automate that process. So if you automate all these things, it really eliminates the possibility of human error, or at least mitigates it.
Right. Yeah, no, right on. And I mean, I think when you're, from an acquisition perspective, you're thinking about that automating testing and deployment, like how are you going to structure a contract to enable that, right? So an automated test is going to provide some results. It's probably going to provide some errors or some fixes that need to occur. You got to be thinking, like, how do I make it as easy as possible to address those errors or to address those tests when I don't necessarily know that I can predict how many are going to occur, and therefore the level of effort associated with fixing those tests. So yeah, so very important to think about that. As you award the contract, that's probably another area where you could think about an evaluation criteria. To what degree does the vendor offer that automated testing and deployment in an easy manner? Because it is very important, as Neil mentioned.
Yeah, you need to be able to evaluate that things are happening as you hope that they would. Yeah. How do you evaluate the quality of the digital service? Well, it's through the results of automated testing. Mm-hmm. How do you validate that the software is being deployed? Well, by, as we said earlier, simply by being able to log in at any moment and seeing changes and updates. Right. And the only way that can really happen is if you have a DevOps continuous delivery mindset. And again, like we said before, you don't have to mandate that per se, at least in terms of the DevOps term. Mm-hmm. But if you say, well, we want to be able to establish quality metrics anytime, we want to be able to establish that I can access the digital service at any point in time. Well, the only way to do that is with continuous integration and continuous delivery. So you will implicitly mandate those things without actually saying it.
Right on. And you mentioned, like, so there's evaluation, right, of the contract or the offers, and then there's sort of like quality assurance and performance management during administration, so just to differentiate between those two.
Right, and you will always get metrics out of these processes, and that gets to number 12 about using data to drive decisions.
Yeah, I think that's fundamental to the entire process. Like, using data to drive decisions should be, frankly, 21st century like gospel. I don't think we have enough data, we have enough information about what's happening in a lot of areas where if you're not making data informed decisions, be prepared to not deliver what you're intending to deliver, right?
Exactly.
But maybe the most important play right now, for unfortunate reasons, is play 11. Managing security and privacy through reusable processes. I mean, security and privacy, obviously we know what's happening with the OPM and the hack that occurred last spring. It's a very serious issue, and it's important that we address it. So it's fundamental from start to finish. But maybe what do we mean, like, by reusable processes? Like, how does that help with the security and privacy protections?
Well, number one, I'm glad that you included this to span the entire lifecycle, because if you ask me, the big problem with security has been that the government has not always built security in from the start into digital services. So it's always been a after the fact bolting on kind of approach, and particularly reactive, as we saw at OPM. So building from the start is very important, and making sure that the teams that you hire, the experienced teams, those vendors in number 7, mm-hmm. that they are very aware of security and how you actually accomplish that from a technological perspective, and that they're aware of the various guidelines and mandates in place, like mm-hmm. FISMA. Now, in terms of reusable processes,
well, let me real quickly just jump in on that. So
yes.
In terms of building the security, and I just want to highlight comments from Tony Scott, the United States Chief Information Officer. This was reported in FedScoop earlier in the week by Billy Mitchell, who's doing a great job keeping us apprised on what's happening with Tony Scott's cyber sprints. But he basically he calls it secure by design. I mean, you have to build it in early, and if you don't build it in at the start, it's tough to go back in and sort of like incorporate it at that point. So I did just want to highlight that article. We'll put that up along with some of the articles I think that you've written about DevOps on our resources page, so that you guys can go out there and read that for additional context. So apologies, you were about to talk about reusable.
Well, it also dovetails with number 3, make it simple and intuitive. It is very hard to secure complicated systems.
Yeah.
So making sure that the system is as simple as possible with as few entry points as possible really helps you secure things. But in terms of reusable processes, there are automated tests, to get back to number 10, mm-hmm. that enable you to verify that your system is secure at various levels. And of course, there's different kinds of security, network security, access control, things like that, encryption. And there are lots of different things you can do. And to try to automate these as much as possible through the same kinds of testing, that's what you really want to do. And people think of testing often as, let me click this button and see if the thing I expect to see happens. That's certainly true. That's functional testing. But you need to have security testing built in from the start and automated running, because you need to be able to verify at all times that you've secured your system at every entry point.
Right on, man. And I think that's cool to think about, just those reusable processes, not only being important from a real technical perspective, but just also being sort of efficient and cost savings. Like if you're using reusable processes, you spend less time restructuring the process every time and more time actually creating or protecting or producing stuff that helps the process, not spending time on process. That's a waste of human effort to replicate that over and over again.
Exactly.
You mentioned, yeah.
I was just going to mention also that in terms of security, that, and this may not seem apropos at the moment, but we can also over-secure. And so you want to make sure that you are applying the right level of security to every point. So obviously you want the highest levels of security when it comes to PII and other particularly sensitive information. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to go too far out of your way. You don't need a 128-bit encryption password to Domino's. Mm-hmm. Okay, you don't need the highest level of security for every single thing. And that gets to also make it simple and intuitive. You want to make sure the appropriate level of security is applied at every point, because you don't want to make things overcomplicated by applying the highest level of security to every single thing. Yeah. And I've seen that sometimes security officers, in their zeal to be protective, will go overboard. And so you have to apply the right level at the right places. And
great point.
And so to be over secure can almost be as bad.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I mean, it's you can see the same thing with like service level agreements, in cloud computing or in other service-based industries. Like don't do something for the sake of doing it. Make sure that there is a business reason or a security reason for choosing a particular level of security, right? I mean, that's intuitive. That makes sense. But Neil, I got to ask, so we're talking about managing security and privacy, but then again, Play 13 tells us to default to open. How can you be secure in a defaulting to open world?
Well, first of all, there are different things that need to be secure and things that shouldn't be or don't have to be. There's a lot of data out there that citizens should have access to, and they should be allowed to have access to in a controlled way. We've seen that available on data.gov. We've seen the source code available to various things on GitHub. Those are all perfectly fine. And there is no sensitivity or any kinds of security issues there. It's only when you have things that should not be open, and we would all agree that things like PII should not be open. And so that's where you then lock things down with encryption, with access control, and so on. And so you want to default to open because most of the government's work is for the consumption of citizens. Taxpayers are paying for all this. They should be able to reap the benefits directly, but only where they're allowed. And so you want to define exactly those places where they should not be granted access and then lock those down.
Definitely. Totally agree. Well, that's it. That's plays 1 through 13 mapped into the acquisition lifecycle, with some attempt to help you guys understand both the technical side of things and the acquisition side of things.
Frank, we skipped 12.
Did we really? Oh, yes. Well, I thought we sort of talked about, using data to drive decisions and everything.
I alluded to it, but we didn't focus on it. But I mean, I just wanted to mention that because
go for it.
A viewer might be like, "Wait, what happened to 12?"
Right. Good point. We don't want to lose folks. All right, so what do we want to say on 12, real quick?
So with number 12, using data to drive decisions, that's something that is preeminent throughout the process, as you've noted here on the diagram, because there's different kinds of data for different kinds of decisions. Certainly, we talked about the notion of a lightweight minimum viable product and testing your hypotheses to make sure that real users actually agree with you on the things you believe that they need. So that's one place where data matters. Also, when you're actually building the digital service, you're going to be generating a lot of metrics via the automated testing and deployment and just general agile processes. And so you want to be able to view these data and make decisions accordingly, which is part of the agile mindset, that you want to be able to react and pivot as needed. So there's these kinds of notions of data, but then once it's deployed, you also want to be able to see how users interact with the system and use those user-driven data to make decisions as well.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, now you put me in the awkward position of having to do the double goodbye, Neil. But I think that was definitely worth that pit stop to make sure we covered 12 distinctly. So there it again. There you have it. Plays 1 through 13 mapped into the acquisition lifecycle. As we continue through this stream, we're going to go into more detail in each play with the specific goal of giving you actionable recommendations and tips and tricks that you can apply today to improve your digital services acquisition outcomes. Well, that's a wrap, Neil. Thank you again for your time. It's really always helpful for me. I mean, it's great to learn from your expertise in software engineering and sort of help folks understand how that kind of like rolls into the acquisition lifecycle.
Glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, I look forward to next time. All right, everybody. We'll see you later on in the stream. Thanks.